Test. Assalamu alaikum. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us for this interactive session. I'll call it interactive because we have a discussion coming that will be exciting for all of you. Thank you, audience who are attending remotely, and thanks everyone who are attending here physically. Today we have a session about a subject that is adding a lot of interest to all experts in the industry of cybersecurity and information technology. It's called Zero Trust. And Zero Trust architecture is something new, but before we get into the technicality, I will let Mr. Yabdul Arabi introduce the company and the session and the Majlis.
First of all, I'd like to thank you. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you for investing time today with us.
Can you get the microphone, please? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank you, Hassan, and the rest of our colleagues in the panel for investing time with us today. I thank you very much and congratulate you for picking the topic of Zero Trust. As you know, Zero Trust today is a hype, but it creates, I would say, a paradigm shift in the way we design networks going forward, in the way we design our IT infrastructure. And this is a complete new challenge for all of us. So I would like, to hear from you and the rest of the panelists about, your views and your opinions about it. And going forward, your advice, for Bahrain and the region when it comes with Zero Trust. So I welcome you for this event, and Allah wafaqna wa iyaakum. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bruce. So before we jump into the details, I would like to open the discussion with a basic introduction or definition. What is Zero Trust? What are we speaking about? Is it a new concept? Or it's a new technology? Is it a product or a set of processes? What exactly are we speaking about? So I will give the mic to my colleagues and subject matter experts here to introduce the subject and to add, each person will add his own flavor and participate in the definition of Zero Trust. I'll start with my colleague Khalid, CISO from Al Baraka Banking.
I'm Khalid, CISO of Al Baraka Islamic Bank. Thank you for having me with you here. It's really an absolute pleasure. So nowadays, when you talk about cybersecurity, is something very important for across the industries. When you talk about Zero Trust is like a framework. Is a framework of a collection of practices that you have to employ to ensure that resources such as users, applications, infrastructure are being secured in a way that outsiders, they cannot access the environment. So when you talk about Zero Trust, it's like having a house that you don't trust anybody in this house. So and anybody that goes in and out from this house, it has to be authenticated. You have to reassess him again and again. So this is a very important subject, actually. Nowadays, with the involvement of the digital transformation and with the companies moving to the cloud, and data and resources are everywhere. So we have to apply the best practices in order to secure this data wherever it goes. This is just a start, a beginning, and we will go into more details, inshallah.
Thank you, Khalid. That was lovely and great. I have my own mic. Sister Najma. So, what can you add to the definition of Zero Trust?
Well, I think it's the same exactly مثل my who just mentioned. It's the matter of Zero Trust and authenticate. So re-authenticate on each and every level. I'm coming mainly from development background, banking background, and now I'm the Chief Technology Officer of Tamkeen. And to be frank, security is something crucial, especially I'm coming from banking. So this one is, and the Zero Trust, the re-authenticate, as we just mentioned, has to come at every level, having the systems available currently on cloud, on-prem, re-authenticate the user, re-authenticate the devices that they are logging in is crucial currently, and it's something that we have to take in all the architecture of our application. So I'll talk always about how to architect the application, how to architect the authentication for all sides, going to the database, authenticate from the application to the cloud, to the databases, to the servers, has to be always re-authenticated. I cannot, like previously we used to have authentication route and then, I'm authenticated. Currently, having all of these paths, we have to authenticate on each and every level, and it has to be seamless as well. So how we can do it, and to me, this is something very important as well, that we have to have a seamless and a good user experience, that I will authenticate them from the background without having a user impact of re-inputting the user ID and password, using the biometric, using the other authentication.
I need to interrupt you. So what we are speaking about here, we are not speaking about a product. This is an ideology. This is a theory, theoretical, and that can be implemented. We are speaking a security principle from the design phase.
Absolutely. The architecture itself.
Coming from development background, you need to consider everything that you have mentioned from the design phase.
Absolutely. And that's how we do the solution design itself. It has to be addressed into the solution design, where I'll get the re-authentication at each and every level. Knowing where is my databases, my solutions, my integration level has to be always...
Knowing, I like this word. So knowing, for the audience who are watching us now, to add into this definition, I will ask my colleague Hamid. She said knowing. I'll not start again. I don't want you to repeat the definition from scratch. I believe it's clear as an idea. In order to know what resources you need to authenticate, what will be the approach you will take? Well, introduce yourself first.
First of all, my name is Hamad Abdurrahman. I'm the director of ICT in King Hamad University Hospital. They quite summarized it quite clearly. Zero trust comes from basically a perimeter structure to the shortcomings that were indicated in that. That's what zero trust tries to address. It's a model. There are 6 factors that are in the zero trust: the users, the devices, the network, the infrastructure, and the data.
The data, yes.
And last but not least, of course, you have the basically the applications that run on all that infrastructure that is in place. So of course, with the perimeter network, you basically protect everything from the outsiders, attackers, internet. Now for zero trust, you take that concept and apply it internally. So basically you secure everything from an internal threat, because you don't know where the threats are. Especially now with the digital transformation, you bring your own devices, you bring your own technologies. So first of all, you have to make sure that what's connected to what is first authenticated.
What's connected secure. To what? I like this.
Application, devices, again, application, devices, network, whatever factor you're considering. Is the user A allowed to access data B on the network C integrated on the infrastructure F? Is that on the certain time, on the certain date? So it's a model. It's not a technology.
A concept, a model.
Concept. It's an enabler. So basically, you can think of it as a lens for you to maneuver and implement a zero trust infrastructure.
Very good. Thank you, Hamid. So now we do understand it's not a product. It's not new. It's not a solution that you are going to purchase or procure in order to implement and reach this concept or the model that you are speaking about, or the framework. All of these words can be used in this case. And if you go back to the definitions, we said we need to understand what's connected to what. We need to understand what resources we have in the organization. Khalid mentioned it's like a house. So what boundaries are we speaking about? Zero trust. Is it the outside? Is it the inside? Internal, external resources? What exactly are we speaking about? This is what I needed to add to the definition.
All right. So first, I need just to add to our couple of things here. So basically, the zero trust is the assumption that your network is always compromised. We had the same concept before. That's why threat hunting is in place. That
I'm not sure if your mic is working.
It's working, I think. Yes. Okay. So we had the same concept before about the threat hunting, that you assume that your network is always compromised. But eventually, what we have done basically that whenever you are authenticated against the network, you have just all the access to the other applications, and then you have to have the granular control at the specific applications to allow specific users, for example, to access the resources. But we didn't do anything about basically re-verifying the users. So the boundary is basically that you do micro-segmentation. So basically you put the users or the applications or the resource. So, and zero trust, you assume all the entities, like service accounts, for example. You assume all the microservices a resource. You assume the users is a resource. You assume the data is a resource. So everything is considered as a resource that need to be verified into the network. And basically, so the user, once he is verified based on criteria or score based, there are multiple criteria that we are going to discuss soon. So basically, those criteria in place will assume that the user has been verified only for one session. So the boundary is a session. You are assumed to be authenticated and verified and authorized to access a specific application for a certain amount of time for a session. And any other sessions that you want to build with the other applications, having the API integrations in the background and so forth, are going to be considered as another session that need to be verified. So continually, you need to be verified. So it's per session, it's not per outside or internal. That's why you have the concept of software-defined parameter. So basically, you can access the resources, whether it's on-prem, on cloud, or hybrid. Basically, you need to always verify the user. You have certain session, and that session just keeps monitoring the user, and then you keep the verification based on time or based on certain criteria.
Monitoring, I like this word. So I'm picking keywords from each subject matter expert here in order to build a picture, draw the full picture for you guys, for the audience, for the people who are attending physically here. And to wrap up and to summarize the definition, first of all, we say zero trust architecture, it's not a solution, it's not a software, it's not a product. It's a concept, it's a model, it's a framework. It can be used to achieve a certain level of compliance. And in order to achieve this level of compliance, you need to understand your organization infrastructure, your external parameters, internal resources. You need to have a proper defined diagrams for all of your devices in the network. You need to know all the data types and applications that are running on this infrastructure. Also, you need to understand what authentication and authorization requirements are to be set or put in place. And finally, you need to have continuous verification. And in order to achieve that, you need to have continuous monitoring. And we can achieve that with a concept called log management and monitoring. This is something that will be discussed and explained. And finally, after monitoring, you need to reassess what you are detecting, and based on the results, change the configurations. I believe this wraps up the definition, and I'll go back to Brother Khalid and ask the next question. I'm your CEO. You came to me, you want to implement zero trust in the company, and you said, due to the fact that we have many disruptive events around us, we are now forced to initiate a digital transformation, come up with a solution to fight back, to ensure that we are secure, and we want to implement zero trust architecture. I will ask you the following question. You are currently ISO certified or NIST certified if you are a bank. What difference you will add here? Explain the differences from a compliance perspective.
Okay, now it's fine. Thank you. So yeah, so if you are going to move to like a new journey of implementing something new in the environment, you firstly have to identify your assets, your requirements. So this is as a first step. You cannot achieve zero trust without knowing what is in the environment that's you need to protect. So You need to identify, I mean, your stakeholders. You need to identify your users. You need to identify your data. And then you need to identify where this data it will be residing. Is it internally? Is it in the external network? Is it in the cloud? So all of those aspects you need first to plan them very well in order to come up with the plan. And on top of all of this, after identifying all the resources and everything, you need to know what technical tools, technical aspects or resources of human resource, what do you need in order to ensure the zero trust. So from here, now we have planned everything. We know the resources, we know the data, where it resides, we know our assets and everything. As next step, you will need to protect each segment. As my colleague here mentioned, that you need to do like macro segmentation, which is very important, because in the concept of zero trust, you need to ensure that once an incident of cybersecurity happens, you need to contain this incident in a way that will not spread in the environment. So zero trust will help you to ensure this by segmenting the networks.
So reducing the impact, eliminating the threat as it happens.
It will help also in the incident response. So you will not have to be, the incident will not impact the reputation in a big way in the environment, rather that it will be on a segment. So this is very important thing to achieve that you need to think about. Secondly, when you're planning to a new initiative, you need to also think about the advanced tools that will do for you analysis. For example, as my colleagues mentioned, log correlation, artificial intelligence, all of those things. You need to bring up those tools together in order to ensure that continuous monitoring and analysis. This is also
very good.
Important aspect.
Something came into my mind here. You mentioned that we need to know our resources, our data, our systems, our infrastructure components, etc. I don't know how. In top management, you are asking me to allocate budget, and you want me to basically support you with this initiative. Now, Najma, how? How can I know my resources?
Well, it comes
where to start?
I think you can start by using any of the methodologies, as you said, the NIST, capture all the assets.
Perfect.
This one is something that we really need to know about. Assets includes, everything, the servers, everything, the network that I have, the AWS as well, the cloud services and the on-prem services, my computers, my asset management, basically all the computers that I have into the organization. Then I will go to the level of the users, knowing my users into the organization as well, knowing all the, having a capture of everything, and then drawing, that's what I will do actually, drawing the connectors between everything, and what are the use cases that I have in the organization for connecting. Having applications, integrations with other parties as well, the outside parties, my users' habits, the new after the pandemic, which is the users working from outside and how they are connecting to my VPN. This is something really crucial, and reviewing, I think, all the processes that is related to the network is something crucial. Reviewing how my systems and applications talk to each other. Talking with the infrastructure, the architecture point of view, and the user's interface. So all of this, I think, it has to be thoroughly reviewed from.
And what's the process called?
Fact finding or.
I can help you here.
Yeah.
So, between Khalid and Najma,
yeah.
What we are speaking about, it's called asset management or inventory of assets.
Yes.
So this is where you will start. Inventory of assets or asset management, it's a process. Now, you could have this process in place, you need to build on top of it or enhance it if it is weak, or if it's well designed, you need to ensure it's used. So having a process without using the process is useless. I'm adding no benefit to the organization. I'll go back to the first question. As a person in top management, I need to know the return on investment. So looking into this, I will ask Hamad, what can you promise me if I will let you implement this concept and framework? What I will get and when and how?
Well, answering that question, basically, you have to do a threat analysis, right? Figure out what's the cost of the threat to happen, what's the probability of that threat to happen, and then justify if taking that action justifies the cost behind it. So that will factor in the ROI. So if we don't do this, this might happen, this is the percentage, and this is the cost of it. Does the cost overweigh the risk? Don't go with it. If it doesn't, then yes, this is something you have to factor in.
Well
Like
said.
insurance.
Well said. That's good. Now, let's assume you do have all these processes in place.
Right.
What else do you need to start the process?
See, any IT project has to have 3 pillars. In fact, this is outside the Zero Trust. You have to have the processes, right? You have to have the technology.
Perfect.
And the main thing, you have to have the right people to implement all these. So you have to have these.
The know-how.
The know-how.
Yes.
I come from a school that decides security should be embedded in IT, not another department that works with it. In the end, if whatever security is in place and your coders don't put proper security standards in place, WAF is just basically a big door that just needs to be I stayed there.
True. So,
yeah.
Question for Hussein. I understand the 3 pillars, the PPT. We call them PPT. It's not the presentation. So process, people, and technology. Having all these 3 pillars in-house, let's assume we have all of them in-house. Or even if we miss one of these pillars, let's assume the know-how, the subject matter expert. We can always go back to a company like NGN and ask for the support as a consulting service. Okay. Where to start? Again, I'm going to the same question. I have all these 3 pillars.
All right.
Hamad mentioned security in design, the principle. I like this. Now, you have developers and IT teams coming to you with a fancy terminology saying we adopt agile, we adopt cloud mentality, we want to go fast with deployments, we need to compete in the market. Can you do that while implementing Zero Trust?
All right. So the first thing you mentioned about the asset management one, which is basically one of the most important things to do. The other thing that we are blind of, and most of the security professionals just go and implement the security solutions to understand the workflow of the business, not the workflow of the IT processes in place. Yes. No, you need to understand the business very well, because this is where your business stakeholders becomes your supporters, because you want to implement something that is basically in favor of, for example, helping the finance or helping the supply chain to achieve a specific goal. So you have to understand the business process and the objectives, as well as the basically the mission and vision, whether it's for the company or the specific section. Now, implementing the controls, back to your questions about implementing the Zero Trust. So implementing Zero Trust, as you have mentioned before, and most of the colleagues have mentioned, what is the benefit of implementing Zero Trust? If you look at the NIST cybersecurity framework, it has 5 maturity, or you consider the CMMI maturity levels, it has from 0, which is not existent, to 5, which is basically optimized. And if you look at the description of the optimized, it's basically about automating the process of having the identify, or having basically the 5 functions: identify, detect, respond, recover, and protect. So if you want to automate the tasks of trying to identify the threats, protect your environments, and respond to the threats, you need to reach out to CMMI maturity level 4 or 5, and 5 basically just matches the Zero Trust, by the way. Now, how you can actually help the business process. So understanding the requirements, this is the first thing. Before implementing Zero Trust, you have to understand the requirements very well. Maybe they will mention they are agile or whatsoever, but you have compliance on the background. You have certain governance requirements that are basically asking you, for example, to implement certain things from Nest. Nest, at the end, it's a guideline. It's a framework, whether you want to implement it or not. It gives you the guidance to have certain categories and then subcategories, and then you choose the controls, whether it's coming from ISO or coming from OT standards like ISA 62443 or coming from the CIS controls. It's up to you to how do you want to implement it. But the way it's getting implemented, it has to match the business requirements. This is the first thing, because you don't want to fail tomorrow and just implementing any security solution.
I like this. And I'm coming to another question because of what you mentioned.
Yeah.
So for the people who are listening or watching now, yes, we are enjoying hearing information or listening to this discussion, learning about new concepts or frameworks like Zero Trust, but it's really important for you all to set the expectation right from the beginning. And why I gave the example of the top management speaking with the CISO or with the chief technology officer, regardless of the position in that company. Because when you come to top management or stakeholders, for them, they do not understand technical terminology or technical features or software, but what you are speaking about. For them, you are speaking gibberish. And so you need to show value. And you cannot overpromise. It's a framework, and it's a process, and it takes time to achieve proper maturity. Saying this, I'll go back to Hamid with another question. Can you draw a timeline for me? Or let's say we are now done with the definition. We need to understand, okay, I'm okay with you. Thumb up, go ahead, green light. Give me a timeline, when to start, and what deliverable I'll be expecting to see from you in the coming few months, years. It's for you to explain.
Each organization has its own. Now back to my colleague, he just mentioned you have to look at the business, right? So say, let's talk hypothetically, school, right? So mainly the main business for a school is to bring the education to their students. So mainly for a school business, the main focus here is that service itself. That's the service that I need to first implement Zero Trust on. I shouldn't focus on things that are outside of that scope. Now, depending on resources, times, and whatnot, you can specifically state that, well, this is going to take us this amount of time to reach Zero Trust in that model service itself, and then grow from there. Don't approach it as a whole model to implement at the same goal.
Very nice. So if I will link what you said to what Hussein mentioned, he mentioned capability maturity model, and he said we can reach a different level in a different time frame.
Right.
So to add to this, between the two of you guys, what we are saying here, we can start from like a low level today, but at least we have an objective to achieve a defined level maybe in a 3 months time frame. So it's very important for experts in the field of cybersecurity and information technology to communicate this message. As I said in the beginning, do not overpromise.
Right.
It's a process that will require work and participation from all departments, not only IT. In the end, IT and cybersecurity are business enablers.
May I add one point?
Please.
It depends where you start, right?
Exactly.
Some organizations are basically between standard to advanced. Some organizations need time to reach standard. So it depends on where you work and what's basically the IT, I would say the play field looks like. So you have to assess that and start from there.
I like this. Now, going to Najma. This is a really important, very important point here. Very important point to explain and to perform. You need to assess where you are.
Absolutely.
Explain this concept of assessment.
And yeah, this one, I think it's really one of the things that really takes time to assess everything and reach and check the, like, using any framework like Nest, for example, and you check where you are. And that, will give you are into which level of maturity, as mentioned earlier by my colleague Hussein. And checking this is going through all the process of reviewing each and every process that you have in the organization, the assets that you have, the procedures, the framework that is happening, and that will give you the start point. And exactly, I'm agreeing with you 100% about focusing and showing process to the management on selecting a milestone, and that will be the highest important milestone that I want to achieve into, for example, into my business line that I want to doing, and also being realistic about the responses that, again, there is an assessment that I have to do. The assessment is very important as well, to know the impact analysis on introducing this concept into the processes. What the impact will be of introducing the re-authentication on the network, on the application, the user, also the user impact that or user experience, for example, into adding another level of security, OTP, or also the budget line. If I want to introduce more of embedded, for example, like digipasses, embedded these solutions, which will take cost per user as well, which
Yes.
and I have to be also very transparent with my management about the actions that I want to do, and the cost and the timeline expected. So and this one, and being realistic, and start with proving the concept and taking it into a journey will, I think that will help into achieving this.
And with this point,
Yeah.
she said the assessment could
Yeah.
lead to extra budget on the organization. So being transparent with management, in order to start with the process, it's not going to be cheap or free of charge. I could have a process in place, but during the assessment, as you mentioned, I will discover things, weaknesses. So the assessment, when we say assessment, you'll hear some people or experts call it gap analysis. All right? Gap assessment, gap analysis, security assessment. It's all the same in the end. The objective is the same, to understand where I am today and what do I need to add in order to be in a specific place tomorrow. With this question in mind, I'll go to Khalid and I ask him the following. What are the possible threats or gaps that could be detected during the assessment phase, okay, or gap analysis phase, and what are the expected budgetary requirement that will come with that?
The budgetary requirement
Expected. I'm saying expected. Of course, you cannot give numbers.
I can just give you some indications of what you need, actually. This is the most important for us. First of all, you need to follow risk-based approach. This is the most important concept that you have to follow when you come up with a new initiative, regardless if it's a zero trust or any other. So for this, for the zero trust, you'll have to assess what are the risks associated with having this framework in place. For example, you have to assess the infrastructure, you have to assess your applications, you have to assess your data, you have to assess your users. So what are the risks that will be linked with each one of them? Okay, I'll give you an example. For example, for users, you have, for example, ransomware. This is very important. Okay, now this is a risk that is associated with users. How can zero trust help us to protect against this ransomware? You have to think of it risk-based approach. What are the threats and how to protect yourself from those threats? It is not important for you to bring new technologies, new tools, and you buy lots of things that will not add to what you need. So first, you need to identify your requirements. You need to know the risks, then you apply the measures.
Where do you identify the requirements? In an organization or in a business environment, where do we usually identify requirements?
At the beginning, at the start of the project or initiative.
So we need to come up with documents.
Yeah.
We need to have some sort of documents in place. And
Governance.
usually what they are called? Policies.
Policies, of course.
So for an organization to start, we need to have policies in place.
Yeah.
And From the policies, we have procedures, derived procedures, that will help us through the process during the assessment phase. And as we mentioned and you mentioned, after that you will get to know what technologies that are required, or maybe you do have a technology but it's not utilized.
Yes.
All right, so
Exactly.
we'll start from the policies.
Yeah.
Then we look at the sub-processes or procedures that are covered under this policy. And from there, we need to understand what technologies do we have, what resources do we have, what expertise we have in the organization, and what we lack, and what do we need to add later in the future.
Yes, indeed, this is very important concept. Actually, you have to know what are the existing capabilities in the environment. What extra capabilities do you need? This is Hassan's very important point that you have mentioned. Actually, once you know what do you have and your requirement, you will know the gaps. Then you can, for example, purchase new services or have new tools in place to have this implemented. The zero trust framework. Just I'll give you some examples, as my colleague mentioned that the cost of the implications. Actually, you have to protect your data, whatever the cost is. Okay, regardless of the cost. Of course, you have to know your limitations. So you have to balance between the acceptance of risk and your budget. So this is something that you have to keep in your mind. Is very important. Secondly, you need to identify the tools that you require to implement this framework. For example, you have multi-factor authentication. This multi-factor authentication will help you to implement for example, zero trust. You have, for example, zero days or protection, for example, ransomware protection, continuous monitoring and analysis. Those tools will help you to implement this framework.
Very good. So everything mentioned here by Brother Khalid, those are different use cases, different ways to apply the concept. Now, it's my role here to explain something. For people who are listening or watching us now, it's really important for you to understand where you are coming from, what sector you are working in, and what type of organization you are serving, and why you are doing what you are doing. Why I'm saying that? Because I don't want the audience to think or have this perspective that, well, this is difficult, it's not going to be cheap, I cannot implement it, I'm a small company, how can I do that? I don't have all the resources, technologies, or processes, what those people are speaking about. And what I will do here, I will jump between the speakers and explain another topic or another subject. The sector you are serving or the organization you are working on, or working in, sorry, and what are the applicable use cases in each sector and why. So we have different organization types or sectors here right now. We have banking, we have government, we have health, correct? And Hussein also from banking, oil and gas. So we have 4 industries at the same time. And I've also come from banking, from finance. Saying this, keeping this in mind, you will now hear from each speaker a different perspective on what different use cases we can apply, utilizing the framework or the concept or the model zero trust, and why. What are the objectives of implementing those use cases? So the sector, the use cases, the objectives we are trying to achieve. And I will start with the government. So Najma.
Sure. So for zero trust implementation into the government, okay, since you said government, absolutely it's crucial. government data or our data as a government in Tamkeen. We have lots of information that we have to protect. We are serving our customers, we are serving the economy. We have different users accessing our application, and we need to have the trust, and having security is something crucial, especially for me. As mentioned, I'm coming from banking background as well. So security to me is a key, is an ABC, to be frank. Yes. And having the customer data is a customer portal, again, into our organization is something crucial to be able to, and I am having a portal that my customers is logging in, either individuals, enterprises, they are logging to the portal, they are getting authenticated, they are getting some applications for us to serve, and we are working on different levels. I have internal users to serve as well, and I have my external users. All of this, the authentication is something really crucial from the Zero Trust. I have to make sure that my internal users or my internal staff is secured, is getting on each and every level, on logging from the office, logging from outside. Their computers are secured. They are re-authenticated and authenticated. They are having the data that they need to have, not more than that what they need to have. They are able to serve our overall objective as government organization that needs to serve the economy. So that's my point of view. So from the portal point of view, from the network point of view, from the customers logging to different systems in the organization, be it their CRM, their HR system, all the systems available in the organization it has to be implemented, bottom up to everything in the organization, and the portal that is serving the outside users as well. So seriously, it has to be available across all channels, everywhere. Asset side, application side has to be re-authenticate and re-looked at in each and every journey.
Thank you, Najma. This is clear. So this is one perspective, one way to do it. I will go after the government to the health sector. So, Brother Hamid, looking at the Zero Trust implementation and the possible use cases and the objectives to achieve from each use case, what do you think, or how do you think you can implement it in a health sector?
In healthcare, the main objective is patient care, period. So how do you provide patient care? By providing basically an HIS system that the doctors are able to access the patient's information. At the same time, you have the devices, IoTs, we call it biomedical equipment, that are connected to those systems to take the readings and integrate into that system. So you see where I'm going with this.
Yes.
As boring as it sounds, it's physical security on the network level. That is 90, if it's not 100% of what healthcare is about. But that also entitles other aspects that are quite significant in healthcare. In healthcare, let's just say attackers are able to walk in through the front door, plug to the network undetected.
Yes.
They can act as a patient. They can act as
a nurse.
An in-call instead of an out-call patient. It can be an in-call patient that stays in the hospital and connects to your IPTV system while in his privacy of his own room. Of course, there's no cameras in the room. While plugging his laptop and trying to access your network. So physical security is definitely key. It's quite a different variation than any other. Maybe hospitality, that would be like hotels and whatnot might be clear to that, but don't have that big impact that healthcare has. So definitely network security, network access control. Each endpoint is an area of risk.
And in order to achieve that, we have a concept called segmentation. So network segmentation is the key in certain sectors. Why I'm saying this? So depending on the sector you are serving, the approach, the methodology to implement Zero Trust can change. So there's no one way to do it. It's very important for you to understand this. No one way to do it, rather than understanding your own infrastructure, your own industry, and then your own objectives, what you want to achieve. So in his scenario, he cannot stop people from coming in, but from the other hand, he needs to have a certain set of controls put in place: network segmentation, network protection, physical security, CCTV
network
surveillance,
access control,
maybe security guards,
IoT,
humans who are watching
exactly.
the corridors and rooms and etc.
Exactly.
So this is another perspective for the audience. And now I'll jump to another sector, the oil and gas. And finally, then I'll go to the banking. And why I left the banking till the end, because, well, for the audience or people who are hearing us, they know that banks are rich and they can afford to implement whatever. So I'll start with different sectors. So I want to show the importance of the framework, and I want to show you that it's possible. We can implement it in any sector with whatever resources we have. Same in oil and gas. How can we achieve this?
So the first thing you need to ask yourself, what is the risk appetite? This is, you have to have a clear risk appetite from the management. So the risk appetite will drive what you are going to implement. And we have two domains in the oil and gas sectors. We have IT and we have OT. And you need to consider something. So in IT, maybe you have the CIA triad, which is confidentiality, integrity, and availability. You have another element into the OT environment, which is safety. And this comes at the first place. Because one thing that can happen that can damage lots of things, and basically we are serving, so in Tatweer Petroleum, for example, it is serving the oil, it's serving the oil and serving, we are an upstream provider. So basically we provide the gas to the kingdom. So risk appetite, you are considering the CIA triad. And based on the risk appetite, you are going to basically, for example, in IT, I can accept, like I can accept certain risk that can happen to the IT, and I can accept also reaching out to maturity level 3, for example. But if I go to the OT, and depending on the risk appetite that I'm getting from the management, for example, in any oil and gas sector, I'm going to accept certain risk that is basically very minimal, because at the end, it will affect the production, it will affect the availability of the system, which is the most. After the safety comes the availability, not the integrity, not the confidentiality, it's the availability of the system. So depending on the risk appetite and depending on the maturity level that you want to achieve, and you have done your gap analysis, as we have mentioned before, you want to do certain things and certain topics. Those certain topics or certain tasks, depending again on the decision matrix, you have to have a decision matrix. So basically, what's a decision matrix? It's a certain elements that you want to implement to reach out to your goal. And that decision matrix is basically contributing multiple factors. It's about it's not only about the money, it's about the resources, the time that contributes, and basically you have the support into the OT and the IT as well. So the different use cases, again, it depends fully on the risk appetite, on the maturity level that you want to reach, and basically it's much feasible to do it in the OT, maybe, because as I mentioned before, you don't want to disrupt the operations. Maybe it's acceptable in the IT, but it's not acceptable at the OT by any means. You have to keep your systems always up and operational. Otherwise, you will get just conflict with the operational team or the engineers on the site, and then you become the hinder for the organization. So the different use cases, segmentation is one of them. Micro segmentations can be done, yes. Always the users themselves, you can always authenticate them, for example. Yes, you can do that. But can you prevent and do, for example, different intrusion prevention inside the OC systems? It becomes very, very tough to do.
I feel it's my job now to explain something to the audience. And Hussein explain the difference between IT and OT, but for the audience who doesn't understand what he's speaking about, in certain sectors or businesses like oil and gas, the operation technology, he's speaking about systems like SCADA systems. For example, I'll give you examples. In oil and gas, there are like oil pipes running, let's say, under the sea. And those oil pipes are controlled with monitored by sensors and controlled by automated valves. And these systems can read the sensors like in real time and detect, for example, leakage, detect pressure variations. So what's at stake here? It's no longer data. We are speaking about a huge impact that could arise from any incident from the OT operation technology or different systems serving the oil and gas sector. And if they don't have a proper controls in a place like physical security or segmentation, as you mentioned, we could have a disaster. We can lose life. We can destroy the environment. We can impact the whole country reputation and image. So it's really important for you to understand where you are implementing the framework, what sector you are serving, and the objectives. The objective is your key goal is you need to know how to reach it and why. So in different sectors, you have different controls, different approaches. So in his case, operation technology, ensuring that oil is flowing without any impact, availability, services like aviations are not impacted, no leakage under the sea from pipes, for example. No one can have an intrusion or physically access the control sites or control rooms to, for example, vandalize or play with the instruments, because this could lead to a disaster. And if I go back to the health sector, similarly, I have the ultimate goal is the IoT or medical equipments and devices, providing support to doctors, reading different, providing different readings and different elements related to the patients. And I believe one important point to be added to Brother Hamid is data protection, patient data protection or privacy. This is the ultimate goal and objective in health sector. And as we speak in Bahrain, it's no longer an optional task. It's mandatory by law. We have PDPL came into the picture back in 2018, I believe. So now we are enforced to hire and to nominate a person in each organization. We can call him data controller, data guardian, data officer, privacy officer, regardless. It's about the responsibilities and the roles he's going to do in the organization, and what goals he wants to achieve, and what are the objectives, and what certain level of compliance to be achieved in the end. And with all of that being said, I'll go back to the banking sector now, because for all of you watching us now and listening to us, you know that banking and finance is highly regulated sector. And when we say highly regulated, in some cases for us, information security experts working in banking and finance, it's not optional. It's not like a luxury that I'm adding to the organization. I'm having fun, or I want to spend extra money. I have to do it. And this is really important for top management also to understand that this is not an optional approach. You need to allocate budget resources. And as I said, if we don't have internal subject matter experts, we can always go back to consulting firms like NGN or others and seek help and support. So this being said, Khalid, what do you think we should do? How can we approach Zero Trust? What are the use cases and objectives?
Thank you, Hassan. It's very interesting. Actually, the banking industry is always, evolving in terms of introducing new services, having, for example, mobile banking, web banking, digital is always something that is evolving to achieve competitive advantage. So with this said, you need to integrate cybersecurity with this journey, because if you don't do so, the hackers or the intruders will look after your money. Now, what do we want to, firstly, when you talk about the banking industry, what do you have to protect? This is the first thing that you have to think about. You have to protect our customers. Our customers are the most valuable assets that we have. It's not the money, which everybody's thinking. No, it's not the data, it's our customers. If you lose the trust of your customers, you have lost your part of your business. So it is very important to protect your customers. And how do you protect your customers? You protect your customers, you have to protect their money, you have to protect their data. So by this being said, now how do we protect their money? How do you protect their data? Now, as you know, data is everywhere, okay? It's not just data everywhere, even the money is everywhere. So how do you trace this? How do you know where is my data, where is my money? So this is the first thing that you have to think about. You have to first understand your business. understand your customers, understand the digital services that you provide. This is the important aspect. And then you have to implement on top of all of this, like zero trust framework. So I'll give you just one example for the sake of time. Now, X-Bank is implementing a new, for example, mobile banking. They're going online with a mobile bank and digital services. How do you implement zero trust on this? First of all, as my colleagues mentioned before, you have to identify your assets. What are the things that you need to protect? The data, the users, all of this. Secondly, you will need to have what is the most important. You have to buy in from your top management. So if your CEO or your executive management or board, they support you, you will be able to implement the best practices in place. So by this, we cannot eliminate the risk entirely, but you will have to mitigate and manage the risk on an ongoing basis with the evolvement of services to introduce new risks. So this is a continuous process. So with the zero trust, as we said earlier, now data is everywhere. Users are everywhere. It's no longer in one physical location. It's in the cloud. It's in third parties' risk. So you have to manage all of this interrelated components together, and you have to manage the risk with all of this, and you have to implement the best practices. Thirdly, is that you have to know what are your compliance requirements. For example, here we have the Central Bank of Bahrain. Thankfully, they support us very well in terms of implementing best practices, which is something we should be all like proud about. We have companies like NGN, for example, they support us very well in terms of protecting our services. So you'll have to have those parties, they support you a long way your journey. This is a very important aspects. Just lastly, I want to mention one important point, is that you have to ensure that your customers and your users act as a line of defense. This is very important for you. They have to also be always up to date, how to protect themselves, how to protect the environment, what are the best practices that they need to follow.
Thank you, Khalid. So now we have clear understanding on the concept in general, the definition, the requirements, the objectives, the approach to be taken. If I will go back to the framework itself, now I need you to explain the framework in details. So in order to understand any framework, I need to understand key elements in that framework. And in order to understand the elements, I need to have a certain set of processes. So Khalid, in banking, you mentioned something that I need to repeat. We have a really good regulator. In Bahrain, we are considered, we are way ahead compared to other countries. Bahrain is one of the best countries when it comes to regulation and adoption of a new digital transformation initiatives, and it's really known. And this is the reason you see international companies reach out to Bahrain Central Bank in order to seek support or approval to basically start or provide their services or basically host their services here in Bahrain. They can, for example, run new solutions or systems in the sandbox provided by CBB. But this is not our topic for discussion. Going back to the zero trust architecture, what are the principles we are speaking about? Now, explain to me the different steps, elements of zero trust. Now, we do understand that we need to perform a gap assessment, gap analysis. We need to have well-prepared documents and enough knowledge about the different infrastructure components, devices, servers, services, application, etc. So explain to me in a brief, What are the principles of zero
If
trust?
you allow me, just there are three things important in the framework of zero trust. The first thing is that to manage the identity and authentication or authorization. This is the first thing that you have to think about when you implement this framework. When we say identities, you have to know what users have to access what exactly, where and what exactly. This is authentication and authorization. This is the first thing. Secondly, you have to provide the least privileges to access the resources. So you don't give more or less. You give what exactly this user need in order to perform his job. So this is the second principle, which is very important. And also there is, the third one is that you have to have this log tools, log monitoring tools to identify the behavior analysis in the environment. So once you have limited access, once you have only the authorized users accessing your resources, you need to monitor to ensure that nothing is being abused. You need to ensure that intruders are not going inside your environment. So this is the third component of the
So, hearing
zero
from
trust.
you about these three components, I will ask a question to explain the concept even more, and at the same time to answer one of the audience questions that we have received in chat from the people who are accessing or attending online. Brother Qusay asked a question. He said, we have another layer added now. Many companies, I'll not say companies, I'll start with the government. They are adopting cloud. Cloud is a new layer added to the infrastructure. How do you implement zero trust when it comes to dealing with cloud service providers? So this is something that I'd like Najma to explain.
So exactly what you are mentioning, the government really is supporting us to use the cloud services, and we are actually going to the cloud for most of our services. So be it on cloud, be it on premise, actually what we really need to do is again looking at the re-authenticate and revalidate the thing, exactly the same thing that we are doing on-prem. The same resources that I have, the servers, the services that I have, again has to be thoroughly look at and re-authenticate every time using the different technologies to re-authenticate is important. Have it on the cloud or on premise, and
On-prem.
that's what I said from the beginning, how I will organize and define my integration, my network, moving from a place to another, server to another, being on the cloud and then authenticated, having a secure channel between all of these is something very crucial. So absolutely reuse the zero trust again in the cloud or on a premise has to be available.
So, a question for you.
Yes.
Cloud service provider is a vendor.
Yes.
And one important or key process that we are supposed to have in any sector or organization, it's called third party and vendor management or
Yes.
security assessment. You cannot allow outsiders to provide services or to basically have access to your internal resources and infrastructure
Yes.
without first assessing their security and the controls they have. So I can have the best infrastructure in the world, and then I have an auditor or an engineer coming from a third party with a very weak security controls, with a vulnerable or maybe infected laptop connected to my environment and ruining everything that I have done.
Absolutely. And this
Can we do the same? Can we do the same when it comes to cloud service providers? What elements of control or assessment we have when it comes to cloud service providers?
well, cloud service providers, we have the control, as you just mentioned, about our third parties. This one is something in place, doing the assessment of their accesses, putting even some of our agents actually on their devices to make sure that they have protected devices. And that's what actually, to be frank, one of the practices that we do even with our outsourced providers and stuff, to make sure that they don't have any vulnerable devices to be able to log in. From the service providers themselves, like the big names that we are dealing with, again, we have to make sure that the accesses, and especially with the SaaS solutions, to be frank, we have to get the access that we need, and we have to have it into the area that we need to have. So, especially having the SaaS solutions and having system used by multiple people, making sure that we are having the monitoring, alerting, and also the right accesses on the cloud and all the service providers.
So basically what you are saying, it's what Khalid mentioned, it's the continuous verification,
Ongoing.
authentication,
Yes, and the
authorization monitoring, privilege access management, and this is a terminology for you guys to understand. So to handle threats coming from the outside or even from the inside, there's a concept called privileged access management. Some people call it PAM solution. And you can use or utilize such a solution or a concept to basically control access to your infrastructure components, to your network from the outside, from the inside. You can also control access from your own teams and developers and network engineers, etc., while having the control to control the sessions, to monitor their activities, or even record what they are doing and prevent them in real time from doing a harmful or implementing or executing a harmful command. With that being said here, I have a question for Hussein to explain another principle or concept, and also to answer a question we received from one of the audience. Do you think, Hussein, zero trust network architecture is mature enough to face the cybersecurity threats that we have? Hussein, do you think it's mature enough? And also, I'll add another question for you. Do you think the current cybersecurity controls we have, if we add zero trust network architecture, enough to combat all the threats? And another question for Hamid: do you think you can identify all your assets, and how? So this is between you two. It's a discussion. How can you come up with all the controls to combat cyber threats? Also ensure that you have identified and documented all your components, especially in a hospital. He's not speaking about servers, routers, switches, firewalls, etc. We have hundreds, maybe thousands of medical equipment, and in some cases those devices are connected to the network and segmented in some cases, or maybe not segmented in other cases. So it's between you two. I'll start with the asset, then I will go to Hussein to answer the question of the threats. So please, Hamid.
So basically, you have to do the asset management from the get-go, but you can only do that if you have full control on the network itself. So you have to take a full take on the network, basically the network structure itself. Okay. I wouldn't say diagram don't work as long as you don't have basically the spanning tree.
Can we say data flow?
You could say that. You could say that, but you won't see the data flow if you're not including the centers. Two systems are talking to each other, but they're not going through you, and they have direct communication to each other, but they're using your network, say a VLAN or whatnot. You won't be able to see the data flow per se if you just focus on a center. So you just work from the cores and just expand to kind of have an overview of all the basically network points that you have. Zabbix is a good tool.
Is it a network monitoring tool?
It's a network monitoring tool.
Perfect.
The other tools that could be beneficial are, say, configuration management tools. So yes, you might have this system connected to this point, but if any changes happen, that system is compromised. So tools like Chef, Puppet. I'm liking Ansible quite frankly. Just recently playing with it. It's quite fantastic to managing systems, especially in Linux. That being said, you have to have a very stringent network access control. So NAC is definitely a lifesaver in such an environment.
Yes.
Anything that's connected to your network should be monitored, audited, quarantined. Basically, create a DMZ wherever you go in such a network.
Khalid mentioned continuous verification,
yeah,
or least privileges.
Yes.
How can you achieve this in an industry like health sector. How can you achieve that with medical equipment?
Yeah, encryption, not only on the network level, but also on the data level. Staging tables are the best with regards to APIs. So make sure that whatever system is talking to another system should not talk unless it has to, and should go through a quarantine zone. So again, as least privileged as possible through least period of time as possible. So UABA is definitely a way to go. Make sure that the user and the environment, event behavior analytics is in place. Any variance, any changes in that should be triggered, quarantined, and taken over. But
Hussein,
again, back to Hussein.
do you think having all of these
OT
components in place is enough is it mature enough to combat cyber threats, cyber
So
attacks?
I would consider one of the so basically about talking so just reaching out to the asset management. It becomes very difficult and it's a daunting job at the end. But I would consider identifying the most critical assets by meeting the business critical processes or the business stakeholders would be the first thing to go with, because eventually managing the assets is yes one of the main components in cybersecurity in general. But identifying the most critical assets is something you need to start with. This is the first thing, and you easily, yes, it can be easily because the stakeholders know what they are doing and basically are getting the requirements from the business. And if they cannot identify the requirement, then it's not critical from them, right? So how to now compacting the threats. So to identify the most critical assets, we used to have the concept of the defense in depth, and it's basically trying to match the concept of the zero trust. So you mentioned about the least privilege. So how you basically can identify the least privilege? Well, I don't follow the authentication only. It's not about the authentication. If you go back to the zero trust concept, you have to identify based on certain things. Criteria based, maybe you have certain criteria. Like, for example, do we have those controls in place? As of today, yes, we have certain controls. It's not mature. So asking or basically to just answer the question about having the mature controls in place, no, not enough. But for example, like Microsoft Active Directory has the claims. Claims is basically dynamic access control. Did the user have the user done specific training? For example, has the password has been expired on the last 3 months? So you can basically identify certain requirements. This is criteria based, and
what you are saying serve a third principle, third important principle. It's reducing the blast radius.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
So what you are mentioning here, maybe you are not mature enough as of now.
Yeah.
But at least the controls that I have in place will help me reduce the blast radius and contain the incident.
Yeah.
With that being said, I have a question. One of the questions came from one of the audience, and I believe the question is derived from the idea that in OT versus IT, in some cases you have devices that are not connected to the network in OT, like SCADA systems, and as we said. How can you achieve the same level of security controls on these devices or these equipments, like we say, control rooms, sensors, valve units, etc.? How can you do that?
It's not about disconnecting them from the network. You have some devices even that you cannot control them because it's managed by the vendor themselves, and you
Yes.
cannot even upgrade them or try just to basically work on the device or installing your monitoring devices at the end. But the zero trust concept, so back to the zero trust concept, you don't trust these devices at all, right? So the same concept comes again at the zero trust. You don't trust these devices, but you can monitor the data flow. So if you go back to the four concepts, I like to present in the four concepts: the least privilege, the data flows. You have to monitor the data flows, and absolutely you can monitor the traffic at the end. And most of the things that happens on the OT network is about monitoring the data flow. It's not about monitoring the end devices because it becomes.
So can we
very
use
difficult.
something like privilege access management solution or log management solution to do that?
Can help, but there are other methods now of using. I'm not going to mention any technologies, but the IDS, it's a little bit different and tweaked into the OT devices because the native protocols that are
You
used.
need to explain what IDS stand for.
So
here.
intrusion detection systems. So you cannot implement the same way of prevention into the OT environment. It becomes very difficult and may stop the operation. So the intrusion detection systems that you can put in place inside the OT environment can really understand the first thing that you have to be aware of that it needs, those devices need to understand the OT protocols. Many of these protocols are proprietary. So it becomes all the vendors will not even disclose, but it keeps monitoring the protocol itself and trying
And
to understand.
when we speak about OT, going back to Hamad, in the health sector, we have a similar set of devices. I will consider them OT as well. I believe in hospitals you have humidity control, air conditioning, but they are not normal air conditioning devices. Yeah, you have also like power supply units, different approach to provide oxygen to some, for example, you have the intensive care units, surgery rooms. All of these facilities require a specific set of controls from information security and cyber security. So why I came back to you, Hamad, because I know other sectors also have OT, not only oil and gas, and I want the audience to understand that. You have different sectors, and each one of them you will have a situation where you have some of your assets serving operational activities, and you'll have devices controlled by vendors, maybe not directly controlled by you. You cannot assess the data flow directly. You need to have a certain way of monitoring the network. So, Hamad, how can you explain this in a hospital? How can I protect or basically monitor these devices? They are not directly connected to the network. They have a certain set of rules or policies applied on them. What can I do?
Basically, in healthcare, we have certain standards that vendors must comply to these standards, which is SL7 and DACOM. So we do have the protocols, not as much as, but we do have that problem with SCADA systems. So SCADA systems is different ballgame altogether. For these systems, we work with things like hardening. We do have perimeter network. These are data centers that are basically designed to contain just vendors. They're not connected to our systems. And we deal with them as basically another internet line. Think of it that way. So definitely
So they are segmented and okay.
Microsegmented, they're completely in a different perimeter.
Segregated from your environment. Okay. So this is adding a lot to the discussion. Now we have kind of full understanding on the concept and the idea. I believe it's time to talk about the journey. And in this case, I'll go back to Khalid. I will ask you, Khalid, what key processes you think you should have as a starting point in order to adopt and implement zero trust?
Of course, the key process is that the first one that we get support of the top management is the most important process. You complete this process, and then from there you will have to have your policies in place. And without policies, you cannot have the journey started, because if you don't have, it is what you what you implement should be documented. What is documented should be approved. This is very important concept that you should follow. Otherwise, you will have pieces from everywhere which not you achieve your objectives, ultimate objectives. So this is the second process that you have to follow, that you have the documentation, the policies in place, and the support of the top management. Thirdly, you have to identify your requirements in terms of what you want to implement, what is the level of protection that you want to achieve, how much of risk that you want to manage and mitigate. As I said earlier, you cannot mitigate 100%. Are you willing to get compromised once a year or twice a year? This is the question that you have to.
So, what you have mentioned, you have documented a certain set of processes, controls in your policies, and in these documents, you have identified your requirements. And in IT in general or cybersecurity, in order to interpret or translate those requirements into an actual implementation, we need technology.
True.
So back to you, Najma, what are the different solutions or tools that can be used to help us implement zero trust?
Well, different things. One of the things may be, of course, the authentication. Adding another level of authentication that is available. Multi-factor authentication. We can add from monitoring point of view. Some solutions to monitor all the logs and make sure that things are going in. There are different components that can be added to increase the maturity, and I am strong believer into the review and doing an action plan on all levels. We can introduce, as I said, the multi-factor authentication, the network monitoring tools and stuff. But again, there are some stuff that we have to go to the basics and go to my network and my journeys in all of the aspects and adding, review it, checking the maturity of it, how can I enhance it, and add the zero trust on each and every level. That comes also to my applications.
So the basics, authentication. This is where we have to start, of course.
Right.
So for authentication to be implemented, what are the most famous solutions or tools, Hamad, that can be used to authenticate users? And please explain to me what authentication means, so the audience will understand what we are speaking about.
Of course, let's think of users as two levels, right? Basically, we'll just focus on users as human users rather than system users. So we're not talking about APIs, we're not talking about systems that are integrated in the system, and we're just talking about users themselves. So what defines a user? I would say basically anybody, or sorry to say, just any access that is given to a certain data. Let's define that user. You're accessing certain data, certain system, whatever it is. To authenticate him, you need to figure out. He needs to clarify multiple things. So when we say MFA, he identify who he is, or what he is, where he is, when he is, and what does he have. So let's just say a user named Hamad accessed using this password, which is the information that I have, information that I know, information that I have. Say I have a token or an access card. That's what I have. When I have it, I have an access from say 7 in the morning to 10 o'clock at night. I'm not allowed to access 12 next morning at 7 a.m. or 5 a.m. Last but not least, there should be something wrong if I'm able to access the system through, say, a terminal in Ukraine.
And that depends on the process, of course, and the configuration. And as we said, Khalid mentioned you need to have a proper policies and requirement documented. So in order for you to achieve what Hamad is saying, first of all, based on your requirements, you will implement a certain set of configuration saying that, for example, an engineer shouldn't be logged into the network in Friday holidays. Why you are logged into the network? Something is wrong. You are not allowed. You don't have permission to be logged into the network. So one of two scenarios I have here: either he is violating the process, or maybe he's not aware. Two, he is compromised. Someone compromised his account and is trying to access. Can I mitigate this threat? Yes, of course. I can put some configuration in place to deny users from accessing my network or infrastructure or application in certain time or date.
I think you should think of it not as a policy itself. It should be more of an equation, right? So basically, that goes into calculation. That's factored in to a certain privilege. Okay, this is the access. This is the behavior. Do the equation. Is it high risk, low risk? So we give the access or deny the access. Now, automation comes with its own, basically, dark side.
Yes.
Especially with OT. If it stops operation, I would rather have a detection policy rather than a prevention policy.
This is my approach as well. I do not like firefighting approach.
Exactly.
Firefighting meaning you are not doing your job. Right. So you should be ready before the incident, not after the incident. Exactly. Authentic. Yes, Khalid, please.
Just allow me to add something here. Now, a lot of you are asking me a question: how I can create my policies now as a requirements. Now, not all of us are expert in this, so we have to go back to the best practices. This is the most important aspect. You don't invent. You go to the best practice, what others have been made, and if it was successful, you have to follow. So one of the most known frameworks is you have the NIST 800-207, which is for zero trust. This is the framework that you can go back and read. to get from it your requirements. So this is very important.
This is adding a huge value for the audience, so you
Yes, you
can
have to go.
refer to these frameworks to understand the basics. You do not need to reinvent the wheel.
Yes.
Do not start from scratch, not necessarily learning how to document things. You can always go back to
the
best practices, adopted frameworks, proven frameworks, if I can say that. And this will, of course, give you a huge advantage and reduce the amount, the time and efforts required to achieve your objectives, and especially if you are in an industry with regulatory requirements. Now, in some cases, I'll give you an example. Back in 2021, July 15, the CBB released a new set of requirements, regulatory requirements. We call them the operational module rulebook requirements for cybersecurity, and requested all banks, financial institutions to basically be in compliance, implement those controls in a 2 months or 3 months time frame. And that was challenging to many organizations, considering the fact that, as we mentioned in the beginning, having a requirement should be translated, interpreted into an actual implementable control, depending on the industry, depending on the organization objectives and goals. And one of these requirements could be the authentication and authorization. And I want to add to this concept or this terminology. The authentication is basically allowing user to be connected. Then you need to look at the authorization. So, sorry, Hussein, I want you to explain the authorization.
So the authorization will be different for the zero trust. You have certain elements that are contributing to the zero trust. So zero trust have two main components, which is basically the policy decision point and the policy enforcement point. So what's the policy decision point? It's basically the engine that will get feeds from the different, let's say, like threat intelligence sources, historical information from the user, monitoring any logs that you do have inside your system, any compliance requirements, firewall, have the user been compromised before, and then you are going based on the policy engine decide, do you have a criteria, certain criteria? For example, does the user have like an endpoint protection installed? Does he have certain services enabled? Is the user, for example, has or is authenticating using the multi-factor authentication? This is criteria based. And then I'm going to assign a score based, and based on the score based, I'm going to authorize him or give him a session to certain applications. And the authorization basically based on the score. For example, I can, for example, the endpoint protection is assigning a score. For example, like we have seen, like CrowdStrike will assign a score, for example, to the certain endpoint saying it's 20 out of 100. So it seems it's okay. And then I'm going to define certain other things, like, for example, he's part of certain department and he have access to certain data. This is a risk score that I can assign as well. And I can combine this as Hamad just mentioned, it's a calculation. So I'm going to combine different sources, different contributing factors to the policy engine, and that basically will be pushed to the policy enforcement. And based on the policy enforcement, I have defined certain policies in place that will say, okay, so that user can gain access to specific data for a certain amount of time, and that's it.
Can we automate this?
Yes. Currently, yes. Yeah. So I have seen certain solutions on the cloud that can automate this process, can receive and they have direct integrations, which is very well done. I've seen like Zscaler on Scope, they have those implementations in place, and they have certain integrations on-prem. So this has been done because it's not about authenticating against Active Directory. It's not anymore the concept, but you are relying on automating or receiving those threat intelligence sources, compliance requirements whatsoever, and integrating this into a certain solution. I would consider this is the components or the main components of the zero trust architecture, or logical separation between the control plane and the data plane. So you have certain policies in place to define what need to be done to authorize the user, and then push the basically the authorization or the level of the authorization to the engine, so the user can get certain, for example, certain access to certain data for a specific amount of time.
Can we automate everywhere? Is it possible? Hamad, can we add the automation layers of solutions?
Yes, but it's going to be
very expensive. So
it depends. Again, back to the main question: what should you focus on? Zero trust, right? Same thing. Where do you start automating?
If I'll start automating, I need to have a proper process in place first. I need to achieve
a proper or acceptable level of maturity,
Right.
then think of automation in the future. So
There you go.
why we ask about automation? Because I want the audience to understand that don't try to jump. Take it step by step. Automation is possible. Hussein explained it, but it's not going to be cheap. So go step by step. Start with the basics. Define your processes, as Khalid mentioned. Ensure that you have a proper asset management. Najma explained it properly. Ensure that you have proper control on your vendors, third parties, and finally, make sure that you are segregating all your organization equipments, network devices, etc. Then think of all of these automation solutions and technologies. I have a question from one of the audience, and I don't know how it is relevant to Zero Trust, to be honest, but I will ask you guys for your opinion. He's speaking about the internet blacklisting versus whitelisting in Bahrain. And do you think it is the approach can be replaced rather than using the concept of whitelisting domains or IPs to blacklisting domains and IPs? I'm not sure what exactly he means by using blacklisting instead of whitelisting, but I believe it's about the other way around. So basically, if I will put this in zero trust perspective, I will say I do not trust any IP unless it is whitelisted. If this is how I understood it, right?
Yes,
So Khalid.
actually, this is the point that I was going to say. If you want to employ the zero trust in this case, then you have to only whitelist and blacklist everything.
But I don't think this is possible on the national level, because new services are added every second. You cannot do that.
But here, see, the thing is, even if you go the other way around, to blacklist, you will not finish, because every day, every second, there is a new IP that you need to be blacklisted, a new website, a new application, everything that you will not finish. So it is the opposite, as we said, that if you want to achieve zero trust in this case, you have to whitelist only and blacklist. I think he's referring to the same concept. So basically, we know some organizations or military departments inside US, they have done like a way of cooperation with other like Broadcom or Symantec used to be Symantec. So yes, exactly. So what they have done, which is very interesting, they have identified 100,000 domains that absolutely you can trust. For example, all those are well known. So you put it inside the box. So basically, you trust
So
this.
no way of accessing the dark web.
One of the ways, but it's basically just identify those domains, 100,000 domains that can the organization access, which is not a huge number, by the way, 100,000 domains, and anything else is blocked. But this is very strict access. It's not helping the maybe for the military, yes, because
for normal sectors.
Because for the military, yes, it makes sense, because most of the military or most of the OT environment are air gapped, by the way. They are not connected to the internet.
True.
So it makes sense. But for the other
I don't know
organizations,
why you will blacklist if you are not even connected.
Exactly. So it does not make any sense. So yeah,
you are already blacklisted.
Exactly, you are already blacklisted. Yes, you are not. Yes, exactly.
I don't think it is. I don't think we should discuss this subject now. Let's start from the basics. Don't jump the stairs. Try to reach this extreme level of implementation. Let's take step by step. Start small and grow with the process. Reach a maturity level, and I believe with this we have concluded the main aspects of this discussion. We understood the subject from the definition, from the principle, from the use cases, objectives, the different sectors and different solutions and controls that you can put in place, and finally the approach to document processes, solution implementation, and then automation in the end. And I believe that was a great discussion. Thank you guys for your participation. I will leave some space to the audience if they have any questions or extra question. We have answered the questions from the people accessing or basically attending online. I'm not sure if we have any question from the audience here. Ismail, if you can, please.
Thank you all for an amazing interaction. My question is that we're talking about zero trust from, I would say, a cyber perspective or a data perspective.
Thank you.
Yes. So we spoke about zero trust from a cyber perspective. What about physical measures? Like, for example, coming to visit Tatweer, I'm sure is not a walk in the park, right? You have to get 100 authorizations, etc. Does that fall under the framework, or is it just we're talking in digital perception here? Thank you.
Yeah, Hussein should answer this.
Yes, it should be. So security is not about the logical security. Maybe you are not managing the physical security, but you can basically give the controls of what need to be done. And you can always review, because this is part of your governance and compliance requirement, which is basically embeds the governance and compliance into cybersecurity. So yes, physical security is basically the first component. You don't want to be physically impacted, and then basically it just you connected the data center, and you are logically you cannot anything about it. So yeah.
So many people will think that because we have lots of connections, everything now is digital, we no longer need to look at physical. But believe me, you can eliminate more than 80% or maybe more of the threats if you control your physical environment, and you know every entry point, every exit, every possible way to infiltrate your environment and gain access to your precious infrastructure and data. And as Hamad mentioned in the beginning, sometimes it is challenging, but still you need to have some compensating control in place for certain sectors like hospitals. Maybe in Tatweer it is by default. It's known since the beginning of this industry that oil and gas is well protected when it comes to physical security. Banking sectors, they have a hybrid approach in case you have customers want to visit the back office. So you do have some set of controls in place, like physical logbooks, or maybe a security guard access, giving access to the visitors, taking their names or ID. So you have CCTV monitoring the critical rooms, for example, like data centers or teller area in a bank, let's say. It is possible. In government, I believe it's not always one approach. We have different types of government organization. You have organization that serve customers, like let's say passport authority. You have people going accessing and requesting services, and they must be served. And you have other types of organization, like let's say e-government. You don't need to go there and access their work environment. They are like, you consider them the back office for all the government IT infrastructure, especially now that we know that the government adopted cloud first policy, and most of the infrastructure is hosted on the cloud. So this is the answer in a nutshell.
Thank you. Thank you. One more, if you don't mind. You've mentioned the topic of budgeting several times, and this is something that registered with me. I remember a conversation actually I had with both of you, Khalid and Hassan. You were telling me that you are utilizing some platforms that helps you map different frameworks. I think would that be a tool that would be helpful in optimizing expenditure while also achieving zero trust, or any other framework? Could that be a good starting point or recommendation that you would give to other professionals in your place?
Okay, with the word you are saying platforms, we need to be specific. In the market, it's called GRC tools, and GRC stand for governance, risk, and compliance solution. And utilizing such a solution, you'll be able to basically create templates, or basically define a certain set of frameworks or control requirements that match your organizational regulatory or objectives requirements. And with that, you will be able to see different levels of mapping. I'll give an example, and Khalid can help me also with this. When NIST came into the picture, for organizations who are already ISO 27001 certified, it was nothing new. Most of the controls are in a place, are mapped. So what we have done, we simply conducted a gap assessment, gap analysis, utilized the capability and maturity model to understand where we stand, what controls are missing, and what to be done to achieve a certain defined or desired level. So yes, to answer you in a simple way, You can, but it's not mandatory, depending on the organizational size and requirement. You can utilize GRC tools to automate the process somehow to a certain extent, to map different controls or frameworks together. This will eliminate double efforts, okay, and double spending, and basically also give you how can I say, it's like a shortcut or a jump. Instead of starting from 0, you are already at level 2. So your objective, you aim to be level 3, for example, if it is NIST. So Khalid, if you want to add something to this.
You need to have a strategy, for example, for 3 years strategy. And this strategy, you need to build it based on best practices and frameworks, including compliance requirements. So this will be like your journey. So anything, when this is what you mentioned, is just one input. You need to have many inputs in place. This is one input. Your strategy, your assessment, your gap analysis, compliance requirements, bank requirements. So all of this are inputs to your strategy, and from your strategy you can bring up all the components that you need actually.
Thank you, Khalid. I believe this is enough to answer the question in a simple way, but it's really important to highlight that it's not necessarily mandatory. It's not mandatory, but you can always use these tools to help you gain, how can I say, an advantage when it comes to the implementation. Is it necessary? No, but you can always use it. I believe NGN, they are providing such tool or solution. I urge you guys to approach them to ask for their guidance, and maybe they can provide you with a demo, proof of concept for one of their solutions without mentioning the solution name. I'll not do marketing for them. I need to get paid then. Okay. So any other question? Thank you, guys. I appreciate all your inputs here today. You added a lot. I personally learned a lot from each one of you. The information that are gathered from different sectors, really important for subject matter experts. I learned from you when it comes to oil and gas, health, government, and of course, my colleague in banking. We are suffering together, so no problem. We share the same pain. I have no problem with that. I'm joking. We are in a good shape, alhamdulillah. Actually, we are doing really well. So thank you, guys. That was a pleasure being here with you. And I hope to see you in the future Majlis new versions of the Majlis. Maybe we can, next time we have Majlis in a big hall. This is the plan. So this is a good start to be physically attending Majlis. Next time it will be a bigger number of people and bigger organized place. And I believe we should aim to get at least 500 to 1,000 attendees. Inshallah. Inshallah.
This time is the first time we do it after the pandemic, and we were not sure whether people would love to come and or not. So we said, you know what, let's do blended. So ما شاء الله الحضور is very good online, and I think they asked some good questions.
Yes.
I thank you very much, guys. صراحة أثريتوا المعلومات
It's a pleasure.
I'm so proud of all of you. أنا دائما أقول ما شاء الله we have a lot of expertise in Bahrain, a lot خبرات داخلية impressive صراحة. I'm very proud of all of you
We are like pearls. We are like pearls. You need to dive deep to find us.
And inshallah we will expand this, as you said, and get more to come. And as I said, I think you've covered all aspects of zero trust.
Yes.
And I hope by this session we've all managed to spread the awareness for people to know about it. I thank all of you. I thank Hassan for his commitment and his support, and أخونا خالد وأختنا نجمة for your commitment. I know you have a very busy schedule. I know what Najwa is doing. Najma is doing. Sorry, she has a very busy schedule, and all of you have very busy. And then yet you've invested time. أخوي Hamad, thank you for investing time with us. أخوي Khalid, أخوي Hussein Thank you for investing time with us. And I think this time we have diverse industries. And I hope this, as I said, gave a lot of value to everybody. Thank you very much. We have a small تكريم ceremony for all of you for participating in this event.
Thank you.
And I thank you very much. إن شاء الله نشوفكم عما قريب.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Online, you cannot do it. I think this is the most successful Majlis so far.